The morning sun barely peeked through the thick canopy of maple and oak trees as Mike adjusted his orange hunting vest. The crisp autumn air filled his lungs, bringing with it the familiar scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. He'd been hunting in these woods since he was a teenager, learning every trail and hidden clearing over the past 20 years. Today felt different, though. The woods were quieter than usual, with only the occasional bird call breaking the silence. Mike had woken up at 4 a.m., just like he always did during hunting season, packed his thermos with hot coffee, and driven his old pickup truck to his favorite hunting spot. His wife had packed him his usual peanut butter sandwich and apple slices, telling him with a smile, "Don't come back empty-handed this time." As he moved carefully through the underbrush, his boots making soft crunching sounds on the frost-covered ground, Mike kept his eyes peeled for any sign of deer movement. He'd been tracking what looked like a promising set of tracks for about an hour when something caught his attention through his binoculars. "That's odd," he muttered to himself, lowering his thermos. About 200 yards ahead, there was something dark tied to one of the larger oak trees. At first, he thought it might be an old tarp or maybe some garbage that someone had carelessly left behind. It wouldn't be the first time he'd found trash in these woods, and usually he'd make a point to clean it up on his way back. But something about this was different. The shape seemed to move slightly, even though there wasn't much wind. Mike's heart started beating a little faster. 20 years of hunting had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling him something wasn't right. He checked his watch, 7:15 a.m. The morning was still young and the deer could wait. Securing his rifle strap across his shoulder, Mike began making his way toward the mysterious shape, taking care to stay quiet out of habit. The ground was slightly muddy from yesterday's rain, and his boots left clear tracks in the soft earth. As he got closer, he could see more clearly through the morning mist. The dark shape was definitely moving, and it seemed to be, was that fur? Mike's pace quickened, his hunting instincts temporarily forgotten as concern took over. The sound of breaking twigs under his feet seemed louder than usual in the quiet forest. About 50 yards away, his suspicions were confirmed, and his stomach turned. What he'd spotted was definitely an animal, and it was tied to the tree. Mike had seen a lot of things in these woods over the years: bears raiding camping sites, young deer learning to walk, even the occasional moose passing through. But this was different. This wasn't nature taking its course, this was something else entirely. He pulled out his binoculars again, hands slightly shaking as he focused the lenses. The morning light had grown stronger now, and what he saw made him catch his breath. Through the magnified view, he could clearly make out the shape of a dog, its dark coat dulled by dirt and what looked like days, maybe weeks of neglect. Mike's mind raced with questions. Who would do something like this? How long had the dog been out here? Was it still alive? The last question spurred him into action, and he began moving faster toward the tree, no longer caring about the noise he was making. He was about 20 yards away when something unexpected happened. The dark shape moved more definitively, and Mike saw something that made his heart skip a beat, a tail, weakly wagging. Despite whatever awful situation this dog was in, it had noticed his approach and was trying to greet him. The sight of that tail, that simple show of hope and trust, despite what must have been a terrible ordeal, brought a lump to Mike's throat. His own dog, an old beagle named Buck, was probably sleeping in his favorite sunny spot back home right now, well-fed and loved. The contrast between that thought and what he was seeing before him was almost too much to bear. As he took his final steps toward the tree, Mike had no idea that this unexpected discovery would completely change the course of not just his morning, but many lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The hunting trip he planned and prepared for was about to turn into something far more important than tracking deer through the Michigan woods. Little did he know, what he was about to find behind that tree would leave him stunned and set in motion a chain of events that would touch hearts across the entire community. But for now, all he could focus on was getting to that dog, his hands already reaching for his hunting knife to cut the rope that bound this innocent creature to its lonely post in the wilderness. Mike's hands trembled slightly as he approached the tree, his hunting knife ready to cut the rope. The black Labrador looked up at him with eyes that seemed too big for its gaunt face, and despite everything, that tail kept wagging. It wasn't the excited wag of a happy dog. It was weak, hopeful, almost like a question. "Hey there, buddy," Mike said softly, using the gentle voice he always used with scared animals. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." He'd dealt with injured deer before, even helped the local wildlife rescue with a wounded wolf once, but this was different. This wasn't nature's doing, this was human cruelty, plain and simple. As he got closer, the details of the dog's condition became painfully clear. Its black coat, which should have been glossy and thick for the approaching winter, was matted and dull. Burrs and twigs were tangled in its fur, and Mike could count every rib through the dog's skin. Empty food containers scattered around the tree told a heartbreaking story. Someone had left some food, but clearly not enough, and not recently. The rope around the dog's neck was thick and weathered, tied so tight it had rubbed away fur underneath. Mike's throat tightened with anger, but he pushed it aside. Right now, this dog needed help, not his anger. He reached into his hunting vest and pulled out his water bottle and the sandwich his wife had packed him. "Let's get you some water first," he murmured, pouring some into his cut hand. The dog lapped at it eagerly but gently, showing a surprising politeness despite its desperate situation. Mike's eyes burned with tears as he watched the dog drink. How could anyone do this? He unwrapped his sandwich next, pulling off small pieces of bread and meat. "Small bites," he said, offering them one at a time. "We don't want you getting sick." He'd learned from his uncle, a veterinarian, that feeding too much too quickly could be dangerous for starving animals. As the dog ate, Mike noticed something else. It was a female, and she probably had puppies recently. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut. Where were the puppies? Had they? He couldn't finish the thought. The dog finished the last of the sandwich, and Mike turned his attention to the rope. "Okay, girl, let's get you out of here." He spoke continuously in a soft, reassuring voice as he worked his knife carefully between the rope and her neck. The dog stood perfectly still, as if she understood he was helping. That's when he noticed her collar, half hidden under the rope and matted fur. Gently, he brushed aside the fur to read the tag. It was worn and scratched, but he could just make out the name Luna and what looked like the beginning of a phone number, though the rest was too scratched to read. "Luna," he said softly, and her ears perked up slightly. "That's your name, isn't it, girl?" The tail wagged a little stronger, and despite everything, Mike smiled. She remembered her name. She had been loved once. As he worked on the rope, Mike kept talking, partly to keep Luna calm, and partly because the silence of what he was doing was too much to bear. "My wife's going to be pretty surprised when I come home with you instead of a deer," he said, sawing carefully at the thick rope. "But she's got a soft heart for dogs. We've got one at home, old Buck. He's probably napping in his favorite spot right now." The rope was stubborn, weathered by rain and sun until it was almost hard as wood. Mike had to be careful. One slip of the knife could hurt Luna, and he'd rather take all day than risk that. As he worked, he noticed other details that made his heart ache. The way Luna leaned slightly into his touch, desperate for kindness. How she kept glancing over her shoulder at something behind the tree. The careful way she moved, as if conserving every bit of energy. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, the rope gave way. Luna took a small step forward, tentative, as if she couldn't quite believe she was free. Mike ran his hand gently down her side, feeling every rib, checking for any obvious injuries. Despite her condition, she didn't seem to be hurt beyond the rope burn on her neck. But Luna's attention wasn't on her newfound freedom. She kept looking back at the tree, taking a few steps toward Mike before turning to look back again. Her behavior reminded him of his wife's old cat when she'd had kittens, always wanting attention but never straying too far from. Mike's eyes widened with sudden understanding. Slowly, carefully, he walked around the tree, following Luna's gaze. What he saw there would change everything, but that part of the story would have to wait a moment, because right now, his hands were fumbling for his phone, and his voice was shaking as he dialed for help. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows through the trees. The woods that had seemed so normal just an hour ago now felt different, like the setting of both a tragedy and, hopefully, a miracle. As Mike waited for his call to connect, Luna pressed against his leg, her tail wagging a little stronger now, as if she finally believed that help had truly arrived. What Mike had seen behind that tree would soon make headlines across the county, but for now, all he could think about was getting Luna and her precious secret the help they desperately needed. The hunting trip he planned had turned into something far more important. A rescue mission that would touch more lives than he could imagine. The sound that drew Mike around the tree was so faint he almost missed it, a tiny whimper, barely louder than the rustling leaves. Luna pressed against his leg, her tail wagging faster now, as if saying, "Yes, that's what I've been trying to tell you." Mike's heart pounded as he carefully moved closer to the source of the sound. There, tucked into a hollow at the base of the old oak tree, was a makeshift den. Luna had somehow managed to scrape together fallen leaves, branches, and what looked like an old plastic bag to create a sheltered space. But it was what lay inside that made Mike's breath catch in his throat. 3 tiny puppies, no bigger than his hand, were huddled together in a black and brown pile. Their eyes were barely open, and they looked so fragile that Mike was almost afraid to breathe too hard in their direction. Luna immediately went to them, nosing each one gently as if doing a head count. "Oh my God," Mike whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The realization of what he was seeing hit him full force. Luna hadn't just survived being abandoned and tied to this tree. She had given birth here, alone in the woods, and somehow kept her puppies alive, despite having no food or water of her own. The puppies stirred at the sound of his voice, letting out tiny squeaks that went straight to Mike's heart. One of them, slightly bigger than the others, lifted its head and let out what was probably meant to be a fearsome growl, but sounded more like a squeaky toy. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Mike couldn't help but smile. "You're quite the mama, aren't you, Luna?" he said softly, watching as she tenderly nudged her puppies. "You did everything you could to keep them safe." Luna looked up at him with those soulful eyes, and Mike could swear he saw both pride and worry in them. He knew he needed help, and fast. These puppies couldn't be more than a few weeks old, and both they and their mother needed immediate medical attention. His hands were shaking slightly as he pulled out his phone again, this time to call Tom, the local wildlife ranger, who also happened to be his childhood friend. "Tom? Yeah, I know it's early, but I need your help. And called Dr. Chen from the animal hospital too. You're not going to believe what I found." As Mike explained the situation, he kept his eyes on the puppy family. Luna had settled down next to her babies, but she kept watching Mike, as if making sure he wasn't going to disappear. While waiting for help to arrive, Mike took off his hunting jacket and carefully laid it on the ground next to the den. "Come on, Luna. Let's get your little ones somewhere warmer." To his surprise, Luna seemed to understand. She gently picked up one puppy by the scruff of its neck and placed it on the jacket. Mike's throat tightened as he watched her go back for the second, then the third, arranging them carefully on the soft fabric. The puppies were different colors. One was black like its mother, one was brown with white patches, and the third was a mix of both. They squirmed and squeaked as Luna settled down next to them, but they were clearly weak. Mike pulled out his remaining water and helped Luna drink again, knowing she needed it to care for her puppies. "Your babies need names," Mike said, trying to keep his voice steady as he watched them. The black one, obviously taking after its mother, he mentally nicknamed Shadow. The brown and white one, which kept trying to crawl toward his boot, became Explorer. And the mixed one, the little growler who had tried to be fierce, he called Brave. Time seemed to move differently as he waited for help to arrive. Mike found himself talking softly, telling Luna and her puppies about the warm bed they'd soon have, the good food, the veterinary care that would make everything better. He told them about his wife, who would probably want to adopt all of them once she saw them. He talked about anything and everything, just to fill the silence and keep the connection with these vulnerable creatures who had somehow survived against all odds. The sound of approaching vehicles never seemed so sweet. Mike could hear Tom's truck rumbling down the Old Forest Service Road, followed by what had to be Dr. Chen's car. Luna's ears perked up at the noise, and she looked at Mike with worry in her eyes. "It's okay, girl," he reassured her, reaching out to gently stroke her head. "These are good people. They're going to help you and your babies." Luna pressed against his hand, and Mike marveled at how this dog, who had every reason to distrust humans after what she'd been through, could still show such faith. As the sounds of car doors slamming and people calling his name reached them, Mike felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Relief that help had arrived. Anger at whoever had done this. Hope for Luna and her puppy's future. And something else. A deep sense that he had been meant to find them today, that his failed hunting trip had led him exactly where he needed to be. The morning sun filtered through the leaves above them, casting dappled shadows on Luna and her puppies. In that moment, before the others arrived with their equipment and emergency supplies, Mike made a silent promise to these 4 souls he'd found in the woods. Whatever happened next, he would make sure their story had a happy ending. They had survived this far on Luna's incredible maternal instinct and determination. Now it was time for humanity to show its better side and help write the next chapter of their remarkable story. The sound of footsteps crunching through fallen leaves grew louder as Tom and Dr. Chen made their way through the woods. Mike stayed crouched next to Luna and her puppies, speaking softly to keep them calm. The morning that had started as a quiet hunting trip had turned into something far more important. "Over here," Mike called out, keeping his voice gentle so as not to startle the dogs. Tom appeared first, his Forest Service uniform catching on branches as he hurried toward them. Dr. Chen followed close behind, carrying her medical bag and a portable pet carrier. Both of them stopped short when they saw the scene before them. Luna, still painfully thin but somehow maintaining her dignity, was curled protectively around her 3 puppies on Mike's hunting jacket. The morning sunlight filtering through the trees seemed to spotlight the little family, making the moment feel almost sacred. "Oh my," Dr. Chen whispered, her experienced eyes already assessing the situation. She was a small woman with kind eyes and the sort of calm presence that seemed to soothe animals instantly. She knelt down slowly, giving Luna time to see that she wasn't a threat. "The puppies can't be more than 3 weeks old," she said, opening her medical bag with careful movements. "The fact that they're alive at all is a miracle." She pulled out some supplies while explaining what needed to happen next. Tom, meanwhile, was taking photos with his phone and making notes. His usual cheerful face was serious as he documented everything. "We'll need to file a report," he said quietly to Mike. "This is one of the worst cases of abandonment I've seen." He paused, looking at Luna. "But also one of the most amazing." Dr. Chen had managed to move closer to Luna, speaking to her in soft, reassuring tones. To everyone's surprise, Luna's tail gave a gentle wag. It was as if she somehow knew this person was here to help her babies. "She's severely malnourished," Dr. Chen reported, running her hands gently over Luna's sides. "But she's given everything she had to these puppies. Look how relatively healthy they are compared to her." She reached into her bag and pulled out some high-calorie paste in a tube. "Let's get some nutrients into Mama first." Mike watched in amazement as Luna carefully licked the paste from Dr. Chen's hand. The trust this dog showed, after everything humans had done to her, was extraordinary. "How soon can we move them?" he asked, worried about the cold ground and approaching afternoon chill. "We need to do it carefully," Dr. Chen replied, now examining each puppy with gentle hands. "Their body temperatures need to be stabilized first. Tom, can you get the warming blankets from my car?" The next hour was a carefully choreographed rescue operation. Tom brought not just warming blankets, but also a folding table from his truck, giving them a clean surface to work on. Dr. Chen showed Mike how to properly pick up the puppies, supporting their whole bodies, keeping them warm, moving slowly. Each puppy was weighed in a small sling scale, their weights carefully recorded. The little brown and white one that Mike had nicknamed Explorer weighed the least, but Dr. Chen assured them that with proper care, all 3 puppies had a good chance of survival. Luna watched everything with attentive eyes, never more than a few feet from her puppies. She accepted the water and special food they offered, but her main concern was clearly her babies. Every time one of them squeaked, her ears would perk up and she'd move closer to check on them. The real challenge was getting them into the pet carrier, Mike would later tell his wife. "Not because Luna resisted, but because we had to make sure everyone was warm and secure." They lined the carrier with warming blankets and placed the puppies inside first. Luna needed no encouragement to follow them in, settling herself around her babies as naturally as if she'd been using pet carriers all her life. As they carefully carried the carrier back through the woods, Mike found himself getting emotional again. The way the morning light played through the trees seemed different now, hopeful, like nature itself was celebrating this rescue. Tom walked ahead, clearing branches from their path, while Dr. Chen kept one hand on the carrier, monitoring her patience. "You know," Tom said as they approached the vehicles, "I've been a ranger for 15 years, and you see a lot of sad things in this job. But sometimes you get to be part of something that restores your faith in the world. This is one of those times. The sight of their little procession must have been something to see. A hunter, a ranger, and a vet, all moving slowly through the woods, carrying precious cargo. They looked like some kind of modern-day wise men, Mike thought with a smile, bearing not gold and myrrh, but something just as valuable, hope and second chances. As they loaded the carrier into Dr. Chen's car, Mike reached in one last time to stroke Luna's head. "You're going to be okay now, girl," he whispered. "You and your babies are safe." Luna's tail thumped softly against the carrier floor, and in her eyes, Mike saw something that looked remarkably like gratitude. Standing there in the autumn morning, watching Dr. Chen's car carefully drive away with its precious passengers, Mike realized that while he hadn't filled his deer tag that day, he'd found something far more valuable. He'd been part of a miracle, a story of survival and hope that he knew would stay with him forever. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "You did good, Mike. Real good." They both stood there for a moment, two grown men a bit misty-eyed, before Tom added with a grin, "But you know your wife's never going to let you hear the end of this. She's been wanting another dog." Mike laughed, already knowing in his heart that his part in this story was far from over. But that was okay. Some hunting trips were meant to bring home something more important than game. Sometimes they were meant to help you find a way to make the world a little bit better. The investigation into Luna's past began with a tiny piece of technology no bigger than a grain of rice. As Dr. Chen ran the microchip scanner over Luna's shoulder blade at the animal hospital, everyone held their breath. The soft beep that followed was like music to their ears. "We've got something," Dr. Chen said, her eyes fixed on the scanner's display. She quickly typed the number into her computer while Mike, who had followed them to the clinic, waited anxiously. Luna and her puppies were resting comfortably in a warm kennel nearby, already looking better after just a few hours of proper care. The computer search revealed a story that made Mike's heart ache all over again. Luna had been registered to a family just 20 miles away in the neighboring town. Their contact information was still in the system, and Dr. Chen's hands trembled slightly as she dialed the number. A woman's voice answered, sounding tired and a bit wary of the unknown number. But when Dr. Chen mentioned Luna's name, there was a gasp, followed by the sound of muffled crying. "You found our Luna? She's alive?" The story came tumbling out. Luna had been stolen from their fenced backyard 2 months ago. The family had done everything they could to find her, put up posters, contacted every shelter in the area, posted on social media, even hired a pet detective. Their 2 young children had cried themselves to sleep for weeks. But there was more to the story, and this is where things got interesting. The local police had been investigating a string of pet thefts in the area. They believed someone had been stealing dogs to sell them, but when Luna turned out to be pregnant, they apparently decided she wasn't worth the trouble. The police detective assigned to the case arrived at the clinic within the hour. He was a quiet man with kind eyes who clearly took animal crime seriously. As he looked through the photos Tom had taken at the rescue site, his expression grew increasingly determined. "This matches the pattern we've been tracking," he explained, spreading out some papers on Dr. Chen's desk. "There's been a group targeting purebred dogs in 3 counties, but this is the first solid evidence we've found of what happens to the dogs they can't sell." Mike listened as the detective explained how they'd been building a case. The theft ring had been careful, but they'd made mistakes. Security cameras had caught glimpses of their vehicle. Witnesses had provided partial descriptions. And now, thanks to Luna, they had their first concrete evidence. The detective's phone buzzed with a message, and his face lit up. "The tire tracks from the Forest Service Road," he said, looking up at Tom. "They match prints we found at 2 other theft sites. And there's more. The food containers you found near Luna. They're from a specific gas station. We're pulling the security footage now." As they talked, Luna's story began to take shape. She had been targeted because she was a purebred lab, but her pregnancy had thrown a wrench in the thieves' plans. Rather than deal with a pregnant dog, they'd driven her deep into the woods, tied her to that tree, and left her with just enough food to ease their consciences. What they hadn't counted on was Luna's incredible will to survive. Not only had she managed to stay alive, but she'd given birth and kept all 3 of her puppies alive too. The detective shook his head in amazement as Dr. Chen showed him the puppies, now sleeping peacefully with their mother. "Animals are incredible," he said softly. "But people can be incredible too." He looked at Mike. if you hadn't found them today. Mike couldn't finish that thought. Instead, he focused on watching Luna with her puppies. She was already looking better after just a few hours of proper care. The IV fluids had helped, and she'd eaten 3 small meals, carefully spaced out to not overwhelm her system. The story took another turn when the detective's phone rang again. The gas station footage had given them what they needed: clear images of the suspects and their vehicle. Within hours, alerts were going out to law enforcement across the state. "This is going to help us solve more than just Luna's case," the detective explained. "We might be able to find other dogs that have gone missing. Maybe even prevent more thefts." As the afternoon wore on, more pieces fell into place. Other victims of dog theft came forward, their stories matching the pattern. The local news picked up the story, careful to focus not on the cruelty, but on Luna's incredible survival and the community's response to help find the culprits. Mike sat with Luna while all this was happening, just keeping her company. She seemed to draw strength from his presence, and he found himself talking to her about everything and nothing. He told her about his wife, who was already at the store buying supplies for dogs they hadn't even officially met yet. He told her about his own dog, Buck, who would surely welcome some new friends. "You know," he said, scratching behind Luna's ears, "sometimes bad things happen, but they lead to good people finding each other." Luna's tail thumped against the blanket, and one of her puppies squeaked in its sleep. "And sometimes," Mike continued, his voice thick with emotion, "they lead to justice being served." The day that had started with a quiet hunting trip was ending with a much bigger purpose. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the clinic windows, Mike knew that Luna's story was far from over. The next challenge would be reuniting her with her family, but that would have to wait until tomorrow. For now, she and her puppies were safe, warm, and loved, which was all that really mattered. The morning of the reunion dawned bright and clear. Mike arrived early at the animal hospital, wanting to be there when Luna's family came to see her. He found Dr. Chen already checking on Luna and her puppies, all of whom had made it through their first night of proper care with flying colors. "She's doing so much better already," Dr. Chen said, showing Mike the charts. "She's gained almost 2 pounds just from proper hydration and nutrition, and look at these little ones, they're much more active today." As if to prove her point, the brown and white puppy, Explorer, as Mike still thought of it, was attempting to crawl out of the warming bed. Luna's tail started wagging the moment she saw Mike, and he spent a few minutes just sitting with her, telling her about what was going to happen. "Your family's coming today, girl," he said softly, scratching behind her ears. "They've missed you so much." The sound of the clinic's front door opening made Luna's ears perk up. Voices drifted down the hallway. Dr. Chen greeting the family, explaining Luna's condition, preparing them for what they might see. Mike stood up, his heart pounding almost as hard as when he'd first found Luna in the woods. The door to the exam room opened slowly. A couple stepped in first, holding hands so tight their knuckles were white. Behind them, 2 children, a boy and a girl, pressed close to their parents, their eyes wide with anticipation and a little fear. They'd been through so much disappointment in the past 2 months, you could see them trying not to hope too hard. For a moment, everything was still. Luna lifted her head, her nose twitching as she caught their scent. The woman let out a soft sob, her hand covering her mouth. "Luna," she whispered. What happened next would stay in Mike's memory forever. Luna's tail started wagging so hard her whole body shook. She tried to get up, but her maternal instincts wouldn't let her leave her puppies. She whined softly, torn between her babies and her family. The children solved the problem by rushing forward together, dropping to their knees beside the bed. "Luna, Luna!" they cried, their voices breaking with joy. Luna covered their faces with gentle kisses, her tail wagging impossibly faster. The parents joined them, and soon the whole family was on the floor around Luna's bed, crying and laughing at the same time. Luna somehow managed to nuzzle each of them while still keeping one paw protectively near her puppies. "She had babies," the little girl whispered in awe, noticing the puppies for the first time. "Mom, Dad, look, Luna's a mummy." Dr. Chen explained how Luna had managed to keep her puppies alive against all odds. The mother pulled Luna close, burying her face in the dog's fur. "My brave, brave girl," she kept saying. The father just kept wiping his eyes, unable to speak. Then the boy noticed Mike standing quietly by the door. "Are you the one who found them?" he asked. When Mike nodded, the boy suddenly ran over and hugged him tight around the waist. "Thank you for saving our Luna." Mike had to swallow hard past the lump in his throat. "She did all the hard work," he managed to say. "I just got lucky enough to find her." The family had brought Luna's favorite bed from home, still unwashed so it would smell familiar. They carefully transferred the puppies onto it, and Luna settled in contentedly, finally able to have both her families, old and new, together. That's when the parents revealed something that made the moment even more special. They wanted to adopt all 3 puppies. "We can't separate them," the mother explained, watching Luna tenderly nose each puppy. "They're part of our family too now." The children were beside themselves with joy at this news. They immediately started suggesting names for the puppies, each suggestion more creative than the last. Mike smiled, remembering his own temporary names for them: Shadow, Explorer, and Brave. Dr. Chen explained that the puppies would need to stay at the clinic with Luna for at least another week to ensure they were all healthy and growing properly. The family could visit every day, and once everyone was strong enough, they could all go home together. "We'll need a bigger car," the father joked, but his eyes were shining with happiness. The children were full of questions about how Mike had found Luna. He told them the story, carefully leaving out the scarier parts, focusing instead on Luna's bravery and the miracle of her survival. "She never gave up," he said. "She kept her babies safe and waited for help to come." As the morning went on, more visitors arrived. Tom the ranger, the police detective with good news about the investigation, even a local news reporter who wanted to share Luna's story of survival and reunion. But the heart of it all was right there in that exam room. A family made whole again, and a brave mother dog who had kept hope alive through the darkest of times. Before he left, Mike had one more moment alone with Luna. "You did it, girl," he whispered to her. "You kept everyone safe until help came, and now you're back where you belong." Luna looked up at him with those soulful eyes and gave his hand a gentle lick. In that moment, Mike knew that while his part in Luna's story might be ending, her new chapter was just beginning. Walking out of the clinic into the bright morning sunlight, Mike pulled out his phone to call his wife. "Honey," he said when she answered, "remember how you said we might need a bigger family?" He could practically hear her smile through the phone as he headed home to tell her about the amazing morning he'd just witnessed. 1 year had passed since that life-changing morning in the woods. Mike sat in his living room, holding a Christmas card that had just arrived in the mail. The front showed a professional photo of Luna with her 3 grown puppies, all wearing festive red and green bandanas. The transformation was remarkable. Luna had filled out beautifully, her black coat now glossy and thick. Her eyes, once dull with hunger and worry, sparkled with happiness. The puppies, no longer tiny and fragile, had grown into healthy young dogs, each with their own personality, but all bearing their mother's gentle spirit. Mike smiled as he read the note inside. Luna's family had written about how the past year had changed their lives in ways they never expected. The puppies, now named Star, River, and Rocky, had brought so much joy to their home. Luna had settled back into family life as if she'd never been away, though she still kept a watchful eye on her grown babies. But the impact of Luna's story hadn't stopped with just one family. The local animal shelter had seen a surge in adoptions after the news coverage of Luna's rescue. People were moved by her story of survival and motherly devotion, and many wanted to give other abandoned dogs a second chance at happiness. The police investigation had led to even more positive changes. The pet theft ring had been broken up, with all members arrested and charged. Several other stolen dogs had been recovered and returned to their families. The case had led to stricter laws about pet theft in their state, with harsher penalties for those who abandoned animals. Mike's own life had changed too. He still went hunting, but now he always took a different route through the woods, passing by that old oak tree where he'd found Luna. Sometimes he'd stop there, remembering that morning and the miracle he'd witnessed. The tree had become a sort of landmark. Other hunters in the area now called it Luna's tree. The card included some photos that made Mike's eyes mist over. There was Luna playing in a pile of autumn leaves with her puppies. Another showed her at the local pet parade, wearing a blue ribbon that read "Most Inspirational." The last photo was Mike's favorite. Luna surrounded by her family, including the children who had never lost hope of finding her. Mike's wife came into the room carrying 2 cups of hot cocoa. Their own dog, Buck, followed close behind, along with their new addition, a senior dog they'd adopted from the shelter after being inspired by Luna's story. The old girl had been overlooked by many because of her age, but she turned out to be the perfect companion for Buck. "Look what came today," Mike said, showing her the card. She sat down next to him, and they looked through the photos together. The story had brought their whole community closer together in unexpected ways. Luna's family had started a social media page called Luna's Legacy to raise awareness about pet safety and the importance of microchipping. They shared updates about Luna and her puppies, but also used the platform to help other lost pets find their way home. The page had thousands of followers now and had helped reunite dozens of lost pets with their families. Dr. Chen had started offering free microchipping clinics once a month at her practice. Tom, the forest ranger, had implemented new protocols for reporting and investigating abandoned animals in the woods. Even the local schools had gotten involved, with students writing essays about animal welfare and responsibility. The detective who worked Luna's case had become a regular speaker at community events, teaching people how to protect their pets from theft and what to do if their animal went missing. He always included Luna's story in his presentations, saying it was the case that reminded him why he became a police officer in the first place. Mike picked up his cocoa and took a sip, remembering something his grandfather used to say: "Sometimes the best things in life come from the days when all your plans go wrong." That morning, he'd gone into the woods looking for deer and instead found something far more valuable, a chance to make a difference. The Christmas card now held a place of honor on their mantle, next to the framed newspaper article about Luna's rescue. The headline read, "Hunter's discovery leads to miracle in the woods," but Mike knew the real miracle wasn't just finding Luna that day. The real miracle was how one dog's story of survival and love had brought out the best in an entire community.